Amen. So, this week, it's the last two portions of Bar Midbar, or Numbers. This is the time where the Israelites are preparing to go into the Promised Land, to take it back from the Canaanites. So, what we see is there's a couple more things that Elohim needs to introduce before he then can allow them to go in, because as we know, Deuteronomy is it's like a speech that Moses delivers before they go into the land. It's like a reaffirmation of all of the stuff that had come before. But this is where they have the last things delivered to them for the first time they hear it, before they go in, before they hear Moses' rallying speech. So they're called Mattot and Massei. Tommy, would you be able to give us a brief definition of both, please?
Yeah. Matot is the plural of the word Mattei or Matah. And in the singular, it means it can mean a rod or a staff or a branch or a shaft or a tribe. The word's often associated with the leadership or authority. It's the same word that's used for the rod of Aaron and the rod of Moses, the staff of Moses. In the plural, it's Matot. And in this context, it's most definitely tribes, as it's written in the scriptures. Massei, and the singular is Massah. And this means to pull up or to break camp or to set out. It's a stage or a station of a journey. And in the plural, it's Massei. As a point of interest, there's 42 journeys. And this is outlining the journeys that we undertook. So it's Matot and Massei.
Thank you very much. So because we've got a lot to cover, we're going to read 30 and 31 together. But what I'd like to do is one person read one chapter and another person read another. So is there anyone that would like to read chapter 30?
Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, "This is the word which Yah has commanded. When a man vows a vow to Yah or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he does not break his word. He does according to all that comes out of his mouth. Or if a woman vows a vow to Yahovah and binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow," is this the right one?
That's right.
Yeah. Her father hears her vow and the agreement by which she has bound herself, and her father has kept silent towards her, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement with which she has bound herself stands. But if her father forbids her on the day that he hears, then none of her vows nor her agreements by which she has bound herself stand, and Yahovah pardons her because her father has forbidden her. But if she at all belongs to a husband while bound by her vows, or by a rash utterance from her lips by which she bound herself, and her husband hears it, and he has kept silent towards her on the day that he hears, then her vow shall stand, and her agreements by which she has bound herself do stand. But if her husband forbids her on the day that he hears it, then he has nullified her vow which she vowed, and the rash utterance of her lips by which she bound herself, and Yahovah pardons her. But any vow of a widow or a divorced woman by which she has bound herself stands against her. But if she vows in her husband's house or bound herself by an agreement with an oath, and her husband hears it and has kept silent towards her and did not forbid her, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement by which she bound herself stands. But if her husband clearly nullified them on the day he heard them, then whatever came out of her lips concerning her vows or concerning the agreement binding her, it does not stand. Her husband has nullified them, and Yahovah pardons her. Every vow and every binding oath to afflict her being, let her husband confirm it or let her husband nullify it. But if her husband is altogether silent at her from day to day, then he confirms all her vows, or all of the agreements that bind her, he confirms them, because he kept silent towards her on the day that he heard. But if he nullifies them after he has heard, then he shall bear her wickedness. These are the laws which Yahovah commanded Moshe between a man and his wife, and between a father and his daughter, and in her youth, in her father's house.
Thank you, Steph. Wonderfully read. Tommy, would you be able to take over for chapter 31?
And Yah spoke to Moses, saying, Take vengeance for the children of Israel on the Midianites. After that you are to be gathered to your people. And Moses spoke to the people, saying, Arm some of yourselves for the campaign, and let them go against the Midianites to take vengeance for Yah on Midian. Send 1,000 from each tribe of all the tribes of Israel for the campaign. So there were supplied from the tribes of Israel 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed ones for the campaign. And Moses sent them on the campaign, 1,000 from each tribe. Them and Pinchas son of Eleazar the priest on the campaign, with the set apart utensils and the trumpets for sounding in his hand. And they fought against the Midianites as Yah commanded Moses, and slew all the males. And they slew the sovereigns of Midian, with the rest of those who were pierced, Evi and Rechem and Sur and Hur and Rebah, the 5 sovereigns of Midian. And they slew Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. And the sons of Israel took all the women of Midian captive, with their little ones, and took as spoil all their livestock and all their possessions. And they burned with fire all the cities where they dwelt, and all their settlements. And they took all the spoil and all the booty, both of man and beast. And they brought the captives and the booty and the spoil to Moses and to Eleazar the priest, and to the congregation of the children of Israel, to the camp in the desert plains of Moab, by the Jordan of Jericho. And Moses and Eleazar the priest and all the leaders of the congregation went to meet them outside the camp. But Moses was wroth with the officers of the army, with the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, who had come from the campaign. And Moses said to them, Have you kept all the women alive? Look, they are the ones who caused the children of Israel, through the word of Balaam, to trespass against Yah in the midst of Peor. And there was a plague among the congregation of Yah. And now slay every male among the little ones, and every woman who has known a man by lying with a man, you shall slay. But keep alive for yourselves all the female children who have not known a man by lying with a man. And you camp outside the camp 7 days. Whoever has slain any being, and whoever has touched any slain, cleanse yourselves and your captives on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And cleanse every garment, and every object of leather, and all the work of goat's hair, and every object of wood. And Eleazar the priest said to the men of the campaign, who went to the battle, This is the law of the Torah, which Yah commanded Moses. Only the gold and the silver, the bronze, the iron, the tin, and the lead, every object that passes through fire, you put through the fire, and it shall be clean. Only let it be cleansed with the water for uncleanness. And whatever does not pass through fire, you pass through water. And you shall wash your garments on the 7th day and be clean, and afterwards come into the camp. And Yah spoke to Moses, saying, Count up the plunder that was taken, of man and of beast, you and Eleazar the priest, and the heads of the fathers of the congregation. And you shall divide the plunder into 2 parts, between those who took part in the battle, who went out on the campaign, and all the congregation. And set aside a levy for Yah on the men of battle who went out on the campaign, 1 out of every 500 of man and of the cattle, and of the donkeys and of the sheep. Take it from their half and give it to Eleazar the priest as a contribution to Yah. And from the children of Israel, and from the children of Israel's half, you shall take 1 of every 50, of man, of the cattle, of the donkeys, and of the sheep, of all the livestock, and gave them to the Levites guarding the duty of the dwelling place of Yah. And Moses and Eleazar the priest did as Yah commanded Moses.
Could we skip down to verse 47 now?
Then Moses took from the children of Israel's half, 1 out of every 50, drawn from man and beast, and gave them to the Levites, who guarded the duty of the dwelling place of Yah, as Yah commanded Moses. And the officers who were over thousands of the campaign, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, came near to Moses. And they said to Moses, Your servants have taken account of the fighting men under our command, and not a man of us is missing. So we have brought an offering for Yah, what every man found of ornaments of gold, armlets and bracelets and signet rings and earrings and necklaces, to make atonement for ourselves before Yah. And Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from them, all the fashioned ornaments, and all the gold of the offering that they presented to Yah, from the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, was 16,750 shekels. The men of the campaign had taken spoil, every man for himself. And Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, and brought it into the tent of meeting as a remembrance for the children of Israel before Yah.
Thank you very much. So, starting in chapter 30, what we see is talking about vows. Now, vows are something that Elohim takes extremely seriously. In fact, if we look at the covenant is made with a series of vows. Now, just something I want to cover very, very briefly before we start. You saw two words used there, vow and oath. And there is actually a difference between the two. I'm not sure if any of you are already aware of that, but I will just make a brief distinction between the two of them now so you understand. Now, a vow is conditional. It requires something to be done before it is then fulfilled. An oath is unconditional. When it's made, it is made. There is nothing that needs to be fulfilled. It is simply in place. So with a vow, we have choices. Do we fulfill it? Do we not? It's our choice. An oath, there is no choice, because there is nothing to be fulfilled outside of simply being a part of that covenant. So you might already be able to start thinking about where we see vows and where we see oaths. And there's something later on in in these portions that actually illustrates this quite beautifully, but we'll come to that as and when. I just wanted to make that quick distinction between a vow and an oath, so that if ever you're looking at the scriptures and wonder why it says vow there and an oath there, you can start to have a look at what it represents to the context that has been put in. So, we begin with Moses talking to the heads of the tribes of Israel. Now, we think about this would have been 12 men. So what does this remind us of?
Disciples.
The disciples. It was like Yeshua giving the Great Commission to his disciples. So if we turn to Luke 22, verses 29 to 30, we can see this for ourselves. And I covenant for you, as my Father covenanted for me, a reign to eat and drink at my table, in my reign, and to sit on the thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So we see there that this picture of Moses talking to the 12 tribes with regards to fulfilling vows that are made to satisfy a covenant, to be a part of a covenant. This right here is shown with Yeshua talking to his 12. So we see now the fulfillment of things that happened to the original 12 tribes being led by Moses, being fulfilled with Yeshua and his 12, ready to send them out to make covenants, make the covenant with the rest of the world. Beautiful picture. So, regarding vows themselves. You make a vow or an oath to Yahovah, you better be sure to keep it. He takes this very seriously, and that's why we see such strict laws as to why it needs to be fulfilled, why he holds it to account. Because at the end of the day, as we established before, he sits outside of time. So for us, we may make a vow now, and it have to take, I don't know, several months, several weeks, several days to fulfill. But for him, it's all one. There isn't that time for the vow to be fulfilled. It either is or it isn't. So we've got to consider this, and we've got to say, if we make a vow before God, we have to make sure that we're not putting ourselves into any risk of breaking that. Remember when Abraham made that covenant with God, where he split the animals in half and walked through it. Now, Elohim actually took the place of Abraham because he knew that Abraham, just being a man, he wouldn't be able to fulfill that covenant perfectly. And the problem is with making a covenant like that is that you're basically saying, what I've just done to these animals here is what should be done to me if I break this. Your vow, he's making a vow to Elohim, and if he was to break that, as being human, he invariably would. Elohim would have then had to punish Abraham, and he didn't want to do that. After all, he did call Abraham his friend, so he took that place. So we see now that a few laws as to what it means for a woman to make a vow. And there's an interesting thing in this, because it says that a woman that makes a vow under her father's covering, that the father can nullify a bad vow, a bad decision, something that maybe he's just slipped off her tongue. Oh yeah, I promised to do this. Oh, well, you've promised to do this now, you can't get out of it. But the father can remove any binding for a vow that he knows is misplaced. And it's the same for a married woman with her husband. Her husband can say, that was a bad vow, I'm not letting that stand. I know that will just cause problems, that you have bound yourself to something that is not good. So he can nullify that. Now, what does this give us a picture of? Sorry, Jack.
No, what was interesting, I was just reading that scripture then, I was having a little look this morning, and it says, if a woman vows a vow to Yahovah and binds herself by agreement while in her father's house, and then afterwards it says in her youth. So that's just quite interesting for me. I'm trying to think, does that mean under the age of the accountability? Does that mean while you're still living at home? Just it opens up sort of maybe it's. What would you say that is, Tommy, if you don't mind me asking?
It reminds me of the vows given to Sinai. And he said, we do. Our father gave the vows, and we as the bride, the daughter, said, we do. Everything we say we shall do.
Absolutely.
So it reminds me of.
It's very specific though, isn't it?
Yeah, in her youth, yeah, that's what I found.
This is the interesting thing. We can actually see the difference, because obviously the nation of Israel at Sinai, it was the nation in its youth.
Yeah.
They were making a covenant with the Father. Now, when we talk about Yeshua returning as our bridegroom, as the nation of Israel's bridegroom, well, that's where the next part of the commandments come from. Now, but that's how reassuring is that? Because what it means is that any stupid decisions we have bound ourselves to, they can be nullified by the one whose covering we are under. The Father can say, no, you bound yourself to something wrong there. No, I'm not letting that stand. And Yeshua can do the same as our bridegroom. Now that's wonderful, because there in Torah, people worry, I've promised to do something that I can't fulfill or is actually going to cause me problems. That's fine. That can be nullified by both the Father and the bridegroom, Yeshua.
So if you're not living at home and you're not in your youth anymore, are you still under your father's covering?
I believe that the idea of being under your father's covering is for as long as you are married, for as long as you are unmarried.
Right.
So don't forget, in times there would have been things like the arranged marriages and stuff like that. So you may find that women up to a certain age they will be married. But don't forget, we read in the story of Jacob, he was he chose Rachel, but he was given Leah because of Leah being the eldest. According to the culture that Laban was part of, he gave that. So as far as I'm concerned, it's about before being married. So whilst you are unmarried, you're still under your father's covering. Right. It's then when you get married, you're then under your husband's covering. So while we are waiting for the wedding supper of the Lamb, we are under the father's covering. But at that point, Yeshua will be the husband of Israel. At which point he is then the one that can nullify or endorse vows. But there's actually an interesting thing that I saw in this. And this is where we've got to be really careful. Certainly if we are the ones presiding over someone's decisions, certainly if we're the ones as the husbands and the fathers who are presiding over someone making maybe the right or the wrong decision in what they promise, because it says that if the husband or the father remains silent, then that's an approval. Now, how many of us have stayed silent to disapprove? How many of us haven't spoken up when we need to speak up? Because it is actually only by a verbal annulment of that vow that the daughter or the wife had made was that actually annulled. Because the problem is, we can keep quiet. We can keep quiet when we disagree with something, just for the sake of maintaining an atmosphere, or maybe, I don't want to start anything here. But what worse damage are we doing by not doing that? Now, a little bit further down the verses, in terms of the husband, if he doesn't annul a bad vow, he's the one that carries that. He's the one that carries the ill decisions. Now, you had an interesting picture about this, didn't you, from Genesis?
Well, it's just a commentary that one of the things we see, for example, when Eve was talking to the serpent, is that many people believe that Adam was right there. So he was hearing what was going on and he remained silent. And then he left the serpent to tempt Eve, and then that influenced Adam. So sometimes, as a woman, I understand that you don't want to cause any, I better not get into the discussion here and just let it go. But as the head of the house, you're going to be accountable for it, and you're going to be either punished or responsible for what the women do. So in society today, it's like the men have been oppressed somehow and just remain silent and do whatever the woman says. But in Torah, the man is the head of the household, and he is the one having the last word, because he is going to be accountable and responsible or punished for the decisions within the house. Yeah. So I think it's important for us to not step on the authority of the man in our house, either his father or husband, and because they're going to be the responsible one, so we have to submit to that. And I don't know why in today's days that seems like, oh, you are less than the man. It's not. It's actually a beautiful thing having that cover, someone covering and protecting you.
Mark said that something that was dead interesting relates with that, and it was like when we met the other week, you were talking about like it's a different role, and it's saying, it's like there's equality and stuff like that, but the man, it's a different job that you have, and I don't know if you can remember what you said, but it was...
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that either one of us is above the other. At the end of the day, we as the children of God, we're all on the same level. Doesn't matter what role we're fulfilling, we're all on the same level. The only ones above us, God himself, that is it.
Yeah, I find that, as Bibi said, that it is beautiful actually when a man has authority over you, because a man is called to protect you, and it's so nice, like to listen to a wise, gentle person who authoritative, but who does something that loves you. But I think man can really misunderstand this. Like, for example, when you study the Bible, it clearly shows that a man and like a father and a husband is a protector of you. But like, for example, Muslims, they read the similar Old Testament, and they think they own you. And today, even Christians, man can feel like you are their servant. They just did it, and like, it's natural. You just do what I need, and then jump around me. And it's not. A woman is a helper, but in love. Like your best friend, and you still need to be grateful for your wife. Your wife is not your servant, and you don't owe your wife. At the same time, it both should be about love.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
of course. It works both ways, because the Bible commands the husband to love the wife as Yeshua loved the church. So it's not like, well, you're just going to do whatever I said. It works both ways. There's instruction
Absolutely.
in both ways.
And that's the thing. That's the reason. In fact, it's you can see it as part of the devil's deception, really, because this what we hear a lot of people refer to as the patriarchal society. Now, the idea of a patriarchal society isn't actually, when you look at what it should be, a bad thing. You know, we are part of a patriarchal society, and the fact that it is our Father in heaven that is our authority. The problem is, people have taken and twisted the word of God so that it basically means that they can say, I am superior to you. No, it's not about superiority or inferiority. It is simply about the different roles, the way we are designed as beings. The man thinks in a completely different way to the woman.
I got a revelation once about the difference between subservient and submit. So subservient is the slave, the kind of, you do as you're told. You don't have a choice, whereas submit is a choice. It's about love. So when a place of submit, you submit from a place of love. The subservient is like under duress.
Absolutely.
And also, to add to that, so when the man thinks you should submit to me, he might mean like do what I say, but the word submit isn't a military term, is it? It means to offer, to give. So the wife should give herself. That's what submit means.
Absolutely, it's you have to be willing in that. Don't forget there were quite stringent Torah laws about what it means to be married. You know, there's a place in Deuteronomy that we'll look at a little bit later that really makes sure that the women are being treated properly. It's not just for the sake of control. It's not just for the sake of control.
And man can lose appreciation for the woman when you think like, yeah, I told you so. You do it because I told you so. But when you say, and then the wife or the woman does it, like, you still feel like, oh, you know, the woman does it in a kind way. A woman could do things robotically, but you put kindness and love into your doing. So I think it's nice to remember, like, you know, it's still a love covenant and not a military orderly thing.
Because Yeshua did the example of serving us, serving the church, putting himself last.
Yeah, no, I was just going to second to what Vivi's saying. How I understood it is that the man submits to Jesus, Yeshua. So him submitting to Yeshua, you know, who else would you want to help? You know, and essentially his understanding comes from God. God is in the centre of the relationship. So the woman has that trust, knowing that the man is going to be getting his decisions from God, essentially. And with God in the centre of the relationship, how can it go wrong?
Absolutely, it's all about support, isn't it, at the end of the day?
And trust.
Support and trust. I mean, the interesting thing about picturing support is it's not like a physical structure where one thing is supporting another. It's almost like if you were to try and imagine this in a physical sense, it would be literally impossible. It'd be like an Escher drawing or something like that, because it's one person supporting the other while they're supporting them, and it's that thing. You are both there supporting each other. You are both carrying each other's weight, and it's massively important. But this is why it's really important to consider what it actually means to be the head of the household, or the one who was submitted to the head of the household. Certainly considering when we look at these laws here, there is such, God takes vows very seriously. I mean, look, Yeshua in Matthew 5:33-37, he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't make a vow. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Now, he's not saying literally never make a vow, but he's saying you shouldn't have to make a vow to have the consistency of when you say yes, doing what you said, and when you say no, following up on that. It's not about, you shouldn't have to have a written agreement or a handshake to have that integrity to actually do what you said you were going to do. At the end of the day, if we're vowing before God, because don't forget, we make a promise. We as believers make every promise before God. Every promise. If we promise something, we are promising as ones who are carrying his name. So we better make sure we follow up on that promise, which is what Yeshua is saying. Yes is your yes and your no is your no. It's not saying that you shouldn't make binding agreements. At the end of the day, we sign contracts to take employment. We may have to swear an oath that we will tell the truth in a court of law. We're not told that we're not to do those things because they're swearing a vow. We're just told that we, as believers, as followers of Yeshua, followers of his example, shouldn't need that to have the integrity and consistency with which to go about what we said we're going to do. And he says in again later on in Matthew 16:18-20, and I also say to you that you are my Kephah rock, and on this rock I shall build my assembly, and the gates of Sheol shall not overcome it. Now this is the important part, this next verse here. And I shall give you the keys of the reign of the heavens, and whatever you bind on earth shall be, having been bound in the heavens. Whatever you bind on earth shall be, having been bound in the heavens, and whatever you loosen on earth shall be, having been loosened in the heavens. What we bind or loosen here on earth has been bound and loosened in the heavens. What promises we make here is being held to account in the heavens. This is how seriously it's taken. Now, we talked about the idea of as we saw in the portion, that if a man waits too long to nullify a vow after having married the bride, then he has to bear that punishment. Well, considering that we've now acknowledged that vows, bad oaths, and the punishments that are or consequences is rather better the word. The consequences that are due from a bad oath are taken by the husband. What did Yeshua come to do in his first time round here? But to take the consequences of the terrible vows that Israel had sworn in the time between entering the promised land and Yeshua's arrival here. He was punished for those bad vows, that adultery, the marriages to the false deities, the false gods, the pagan practices. He had to take that. But this is why we can take reassurance in the fact that when he comes as our bridegroom, when he comes as Israel's husband, it will be in the kingdom. It will be in the kingdom. It will be Israel, reunited, reunified. But this is why, as it stands now, we have to take care. We have to pay attention. When God says something is to be taken seriously, it has to be taken seriously. If we make a vow, an oath, a promise, anything like that, we have to make sure that we're not doing it. We're not making that vow knowing that we could break it. If you can't fulfill that, if you can't fulfill the criteria of having made that vow, don't do it. Remember, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Follow the example of Yeshua. If you're going to promise, make sure you can fulfill it. But there is something here that I'd want to draw your attention to about how important this is. Now, we take the bread and the wine to signify our acceptance of the covenants. That is a serious vow. And And that's why in 1 Corinthians, when Paul talks about the bread and the wine, he makes some pretty stern requirements of that. Now Yeshua, when he delivered it, he didn't say what Paul says, but Paul, don't forget, he was a very learned man and he understood the Torah. He understood the laws about making oaths, about binding yourself to an agreement. I'd like us to turn to 1 Corinthians 11, and if anyone is there, I would like to read 26, verse 26 to 29.
For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the death of the Master until he comes. So that whoever should eat this bread or drink this cup of the Master unworthily shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Master. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For one who is eating and drinking unworthily eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the body of the Master.
That is something that we cannot take lightly. But there is hope. There is hope for us. If we're walking in the ways of God, we can see elsewhere in the Torah that we are given the means of fulfilling our vows. We don't have to worry about if we make a vow that we won't be able to fulfill it. Now, we've got to be careful. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be careful, but we know that if we are to make a vow, that God will make a way for us to actually fulfill that. It's our choice as to whether to take it, but he gives it to us nonetheless. And I'd like us to turn to Leviticus 27, and it's verses 1 to 8.
Then Yahovah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when anyone makes a special vow to Yahovah involving the valuation of persons, then your valuation of a male from 20 years old to 60 years old should be 50 shekels of silver, after the shekel of the sanctuary. If it is a female, then your valuation should be 30 shekels. If the person is from 5 years to 20 years old, then your valuation is to be 20 shekels for a male and 10 shekels for a female. If the person is from 1 month to 5 years old, then your valuation is to be 5 shekels of silver for a male and 3 shekels of silver for a female. If the person is from 60 years old and upward, if it is a male, then your valuation is to be 15 shekels, and for a female, 10 shekels. But if he is poorer than your valuation, then he is to be set before the priest, and the priest will set a value for him, in keeping with what the one who made the vow can afford.
How beautiful is that? Now, it's right there we see some very specific amounts of shekels that need to be given to bind that vow. So we are given clear instructions as to what we need to do, but if you can't afford it, then you go before the priest and he sets the evaluation. Just as we can go before Yeshua as our high priest to set that evaluation. We may be too poor to pay what we have vowed, but he will set that for us.
You go ahead, Tommy.
When Judas betrayed Yeshua for 30 pieces of silver, 30 shekels, Yeshua paid the price for the bride.
Oh no.
That's beautiful. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. That really puts it into perspective there.
Wow.
How we can see that these Torah laws actually had an impact on the very work of Messiah, even outside of what he was doing himself. That's beautiful.
Also, Yeshua was 30, wasn't he? When he done his
Yeah.
ministry?
That's right. Yeah.
John Baptist.
That's amazing. Right, so we'll move on to the chapter 31 that we read. And this is about the war with Midian. Now, this is a pretty brutal chapter when you look at it, but we'll break it down. Now, Midian had been, let's say, a thorn in the side of Israel for a long time. It was Midianite traders that Joseph was sold by his brothers to, and then they sold Joseph to Egypt. So when we look at this, what do we see? We see the nation of Israel being sold to Egypt by Midianite traders. Now, we aren't given huge descriptions of who the Midianites were. All we knew that they were people who, let's say, didn't get on with Israel. But what we can see is that when they are talked about, it always seems to be about personal gain. What they do because they are looking for something out of it. Whatever they do, it's only if they can get something out of it. They don't really live righteously. It's only about profit. It's only about gain. Certainly when you look at the fact that they sold this poor lad to some guy in Egypt just for the sake of money, as if life could be completely devalued to just simply financial gain. So Elohim's going to have something to say about this. They live contrary to what he wants from his people. So these guys need to be gone. These guys need to be sorted out. We read back in Numbers 25, he declared war on Midian. So why is it restated now? Well, this is the marching orders. He declared war a few chapters ago. Now he's going to war, because now is the time for those wrongs to be righted. Now in Luke 6, we read Yeshua himself telling us that what wrongs are made against God's people will be righted.
Yeah.
Luke 6:24-30. But woe to you who are rich, because you are receiving your comfort. Again, we just talked about the Midianites being traders. It was all about profit. It was all about gain. So woe to you who are rich, because you are receiving your comfort. Woe to you who have been filled, because you shall hunger. Woe to you who are laughing now, because you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for thus their fathers did to the false prophets. But I say to you who are hearing, love your enemies, do good to those hating you, bless those cursing you, and pray for those insulting you. And to him who hits you on the one cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your outer garment, do not withhold your inner garment either. And give to everyone who asks of you, and from him who takes away what is yours, do not ask it back. It is God's place to wrong those rights. If Israel had gone to war with Midian under their own strength, we saw this earlier in the chapter. You know, after the report is brought back and you know, they realise that everything's been taken away, because they we don't want to go into the land because all the people there will conquer us. Well, and then they get given that edict from Yah that they'll never enter the land. But then they go, all right, let's go and do it now then. What happens? They get wiped out. If we try to fight our own battles, we will lose if we haven't got God going before us. And this is what Yeshua's talking about. We don't need to be worried about the aggression that we are faced with. Someone hits us on the left cheek, fine. Turn the right cheek to them. It's not for us to take that vengeance. Vengeance is God's, and God's alone. Amen. He is the one that will wrong those rights. So when
right those wrongs.
Sorry, yes, thank you. Right those wrongs. So this is the point of this. This is why they had to wait for the commandment to go to war. They had to wait for the marching order, because otherwise it wouldn't have been God fighting that victory for them. Now we see 1,000 men from each tribe, 12,000 men going to war. But it specifies one man in particular, Pinchas. Now, one of the things that we can think, Pinchas, in the last portion, was given a covenant of peace. Why is a man with a covenant of peace with God going out to war? Well, what was he going there with? He took the holy utensils of God. He took the shofar. It was through him that God was with them, because that covenant of peace that God had given to Pinchas could then be offered to those who were taken captive at the end. He could be the one to extend that grace. And you're thinking, okay, well, that's all well and good, but they were commanded to wipe everyone except the girls that had not laid with a man. So where's the covenant of peace there? Well, okay, let's look at why they were commanded to go that far and wipe everyone except that small demographic out. If we think, in fact, this also feeds into why Moses and Eleazar were so angry with them when they returned with the women, with their children captives. Because obviously you would have thought that the Hebrews were thinking, well, we're not going to kill the mothers. We're not going to kill the mothers and their children. We'll take them captive, that's fine. But there's a very good reason for not doing this, for why they were commanded not to do this. The men, fair enough. I mean, that makes sense. They're the ones who could actually rise up and fight, taking revenge on the children of Israel. So, okay, we accept that. But why the male children? Well, think about it. The male children of Midian would not have been allowed to marry a daughter from any of the tribes of Israel. They would have simply been there as servants. Now, if anything's going to breed discontent, it's that. They would have had the memories of their fathers, their uncles, their grandfathers being wiped out by the children of Israel. That would be allowing a rebellion to brew over all those years. If they hadn't taken those people out of the equation, then they would have been bringing their own downfall about.
I heard an interesting quote once. It was, kill one man and both of his sons will become your enemy.
Yeah, that's it.
So you could imagine that, couldn't you? Obviously their parents would have been killed in the war, and we don't know how young these men was. They could have still old enough to remember. So there's always going to be vengeance still in the heart, isn't it?
Exactly. So the thing is, Midian is not a group of people that is of God. They're not going to be following the laws of, well, vengeance is mine, say the Ahlbai. They're not going to be following those principles. They will become warlike, but through organising rebellion secretly. So they couldn't take that risk. Okay, then so why the women? You know, the children of Israel were merciful, and they brought the women back with their children. Well, we read in that passage that these were the same women who drew Israel from out of God's covering of Baal Peor. These were the ones who had corrupted Israel. These were the ones who enticed them away from God and led them into adultery. Therefore, they were subject to the laws of adultery that had been delivered to the children of Israel at this point. Now, okay, so a lot of people, that's fine. We've saw that, but then why did they say, we keep the virginal daughters of Midian alive? Isn't that a little bit? Well, let's look at this. Yeah, we said the sons couldn't marry one of the daughters of Israel, but that was not the same for the daughters of Midian. They could, later on, when they reached the appropriate age, they could then marry one of the men of Israel. And we see in Deuteronomy 20, 21, 10 to 13. Could someone turn to Deuteronomy 21, 10 to 13, please?
When you go out to war against your enemies, and Yahovah your God hands them over to you, and you take them captive, suppose you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her, and would take her as a wife for yourself. Then you are to bring her into your house, and she must shave her head, trim her nails, and remove her captive's clothing, then sit in your house and weep for her father and mother a full month. After that, you may go to her and become her husband, and she will be your wife.
Could you just read verse 14 as well for me, please?
Now if you are not pleased with her, then you may send her off, wherever she wishes, but you must certainly not sell her for silver. You may not treat her as merchandise, since you have humiliated her.
You may not treat her as merchandise. These people weren't just prisoners of war. They weren't just for the pleasure of the soldiers. Oh, no. These people had to be treated right, because through marriage, they were grafted in.
Amen.
They were grafted in to the nation of Israel. They were to be treated as respectfully as those who were daughters of Israel. Now, this is massively important, because this, I think you're all starting to get those cogs working, think about where this is going to lead us. Yeshua has taken a Gentile bride being grafted into Israel. You know, in him there is no Jew or Gentile, just those who follow him.
I just can't imagine how it can be right, someone murders your family and then you have to make sex to them, they rape you. I just don't understand how it can be like peaceful for a woman to accept that.
But that's why it wasn't just about sex. That's why it had to be a proper marriage. Don't forget what we just read in Deuteronomy. They had to be given time to mourn. Don't forget, if their entire family had been wiped out, then the best thing for them is to be given a loving, supportive home.
Joe covered this a few Torah last year, I think it was. He covered it pretty well, and it is quite hard for us to understand it in our modern time, and really put it into perspective, because what you've got to realise is this isn't like the societies around them are blood drinkers, child sacrifices. If a woman doesn't have a man in this era, they can't just go out and get a job.
Yeah.
They can't just go out and provide for themselves. They can't. So it would almost be sending them to the death if you wouldn't be inviting, at least offering to invite them in. And like it says, they can go free at their own choice. But this was this is mercy for the people. Basically, what you got to read, this is the wilderness where this is taking place.
It's all an act of mercy.
It's an act of mercy. The alternative is the children most likely being sacrificed along with them, and then they with the surrounding nations and rape and all of that horrible things.
That's it. The daughters of the armies that would have been completely wiped out, if they'd just been left, they would have just been wandered, and then at the mercy of as Jack was saying, the other pagan cultures where they would be at risk of that. The children of Israel were commanded not to. If they see someone who they think that I'd like that person to be my wife, that was the point. It wasn't about rape. It had to be a wedding. It had to be a marriage. And this is how it becomes a picture of what we have been as those grafted in to that to Israel. It's like we are those Gentiles who have been grafted in through that covenant of peace given to us by the priest. Don't forget, Pinchas went out with the soldiers, with the voice of God, that shofar, with those holy utensils, so that the covenant of peace could be offered to those who were brought back in, who could then be the brides of the children of Israel. So it was all about protecting. It was actually all about grace.
And we do see Yeshua himself reject believers. Was it Mark? Is it where he says, depart from me? But basically, he's speaking to people who are working in the gifts, and he said, "Depart from me, those who practice lawlessness." Yeah. So, does anyone know the scripture? My phone is on the recording. So anyway, what it is, we see Yeshua can reject us just as much as the surrounding nations can. Israel can also reject the prisoners of war.
Absolutely.
So it's a New Testament thing, and as well as Old Testament.
Absolutely. This idea was that we broke down. That's why I broke down first why those demographics had to go, but also why there were laws in place for those who remain, because they couldn't risk descent, they couldn't risk further adultery. But those virginal young women who had never been corrupted by a man, they could be offered that covenant of peace that Pinchas took with the soldiers. If any soldiers had done what maybe the pagan nations would have done, they would have been at the mercy of the Torah themselves. They would have been at the mercy of the Torah themselves. So there's just a couple more things that we'll do from this, and then we will take a break because it's been quite a heavy one. But we'll pick back up after the break. But I'd just like to cover verses 7 and 8. For those who think they can get away with cursing Israel, I don't think so. I don't think so. Literally, all the men of Midian were killed. All of them. All 5 kings. All 5 of the Midian kings. Oh, and look at this. Balaam. For those who thought Balaam had got away with it at the end of the Torah portion, Balak, oh no, he may have been the mouthpiece delivering the prophecies of the Messiah to the Gentile nations, to Balak. Because think about it like this: that was the very first time that anyone outside of Israel had heard the promises that were given by God to Abraham. That was the point where they were told how significant this nation were. How devastating would that have been? I'm going to get the better of this nation. All right, those that war didn't work, we'll try cursing instead. And then to be told that God himself had made those promises to the forefather of that nation.
Sorry, I've just found the scripture, but if it's I don't want to.
Oh no, please share.
So it's in it's Matthew 7, and it's 21. So I'll just read it out, and I'm sure you will be aware of it once you hear it. So, not everyone who says to me, Master, Master, shall enter the reign of the heavens, but he who is doing the desire of my Father in the heavens. Many shall say to me in that day, Master, Master, have we not prophesied in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and done many mighty works in your name? And then I shall declare to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you who work lawlessness. So what I was referring to earlier, when I couldn't find the scripture, is that Yeshua in the New Testament can still almost reject us. He's not rejecting Gentiles. He's rejecting people who believers. So if this person comes in, and what the text is, because you said, are we just going to get raped and then left with? What it's saying is that if they come in, they marry them, and then that woman does not submit to the marriage, and basically she's becoming an adulterous bride. That's what she's doing. She's becoming an adulterous bride. So by Torah law, she then the man is allowed to refuse her because she's committed adultery. And this is the Yeshua speaking to believers here who are committing adultery. Basically, they're using his name but committing adultery. Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I was a bit.
No, that's good. But this is that also shows something else as well. Is there are pretty specific laws as to how we are to treat everyone. I mean, even Yeshua says, "Bless those who curse you, that love your enemies." That's some pretty tall thing. We know that nothing that Yeshua said is contrary to that's in the Torah. So the Torah is about that idea of teaching us how to love people, even those who hate us. So the thing is, with the laws with how to honour one who'd been taken captive and things like that, it's not just about the husband being able to put out that wife. At the end of the day, they were given really specific guidance as to how to treat those. If they hadn't been treating those women in a way that would make them want to stay and take that covenant and become a part of that nation, then they're the ones that are not carrying the name of God. They're not the ones who are not representing him properly.
Yeah.
And therefore that hand of grace that is extended to those captives, those taken captive, who a married life would be a much better prospect than anything they could face. Those who abuse that prospect, they're the ones breaking Torah. They're the ones breaking Torah. So the Torah doesn't just protect those who are of Israel, it protects those who are drawn in and grafted into Israel. So we see that grace is just, it's there. So
Mark, I just want to say, I think it's because marriage is so important. That's why there is a severity with the consequence, isn't it?
absolutely.
Because it is a representation of Yeshua and the church and his people, and because it represents Israel as well, and the love of Israel, and because it is a love story, the Bible, and because we are like a glimmer of that in the marriage. That's why there's a lot of teaching on it, a lot of instruction about it, because it matters to God.
Oh, it really does. And this is why it was significant that it was all about marriage covenants for those who were taken captive, because they had to show what they had been given by God himself. You know, they had to represent that. It's massively important. It's massively important because it's all about, as we were talking about before, it's all about one person supporting the other, not one person carrying the other. What each person supporting the other, both of them.
Yeah.
That's why it's massively important. But just to move on and going back. No, it's all good. It's all good. That was brilliant. Just want to restate, Balaam got his up and comings. You know, he wasn't able to just go and try, because even though he knew God didn't want God, he couldn't curse the children of Israel. He still tried. Even though he still passed that message on to Balak, oh, that we shouldn't be doing this. Well, why did you still go and do it then? He still attempted to curse Israel, and he got what was coming to him, because it says, what is blessed cannot be cursed, and those who curse you will be cursed.
And it also says later on in the scripture that I think it warns against, don't be like Balaam, who sold himself to the wage of unrighteousness.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that gave the context that what Balaam did, it was looking for a profit money-wise for himself.
Well, look at how his story is introduced. Messengers from Balak come to his gaff, and they say, "Here we come with compliments from the king. He reckons you're a brilliant diviner. Here's the diviner's fee." And he's just like, "All right, we'll stay the night. I'll speak to God, see how it works out. Sorry guys, God doesn't want me to do it. Next time, even more important people, significantly more than a diviner's fee, and not just a compliment, but honours, great esteem. I've got to go and speak to God. I'll be back in a bit. No, he's all right. I'll come with you." It was a lot easier to go against the word of God for Balaam when they came with greater riches than simply the invoice fee that they would have given him. So he worked lawlessness for his own gain. And this is the problem. Even though he was used as a vessel by God later in that story, we see here that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough to protect him. I mean, that's quite a startling image. That's quite a scary picture in itself, because going right back to the verses that Jack read for us, "Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness."
Wow, yeah.
People may come in the name of God. People may know the scriptures. People may know the name and the ordinances of God. But does that mean that they are necessarily of him? Absolutely not. Balaam shows us this. But this portion also shows us what's coming to those people. Balaam is just written off, just in a single verse you say, "Oh yeah, Balaam was there and he got killed." What a pathetic end. What a pathetic end to a man who would seek to gain riches from cursing Israel.
And he was gifted as well. He had these amazing gifts where people come to him, and it just ties in perfect with the scripture.
Yeah.
I read out of Matthew 7:23, because these people are also gifted in spiritually. You know, like, did you not cast out demons in my name? So and we know obviously he was a sorcerer. So
Absolutely.
I think it's a great check as well for those who are gifted spiritually to understand what's being said here. You can use them for the purpose of the art, or
for your own gain.
for your own
And
gain.
that's it. I mean, you look, Balaam in the Torah portion of Balak, he's a prophet. Now, I know we refer to as a magician, a soothsayer, a diviner, a sorcerer, but he is a prophet. Don't forget, the definition of the word prophet is not one who receives visions of the future from God. A prophet is someone who speaks directly to God and then acts as an intermediary with the people. So all of the prophets, well, why do we call them prophets? Because God spoke to them personally, and they then passed the message on. That is exactly what we see with Balaam. That is exactly what we see with Balaam. He speaks to God personally. He had some incredible gifts. But what did he do with them? Later on in Joshua, now I can't remember where it is, but in Joshua, we once again refer to Balaam, but simply as a soothsayer. That's it. He started as a prophet and he ended as just a soothsayer. That shows what can happen to us who are given these wonderful gifts from God, but who abuse them for their own gain.
Using them in the wrong kingdom.
Yeah, exactly. Balaam was a prophet, killed and mentioned as if he was nothing more than simply just, oh yeah, by the way, that guy was there. And then referred to in Joshua later on as just a soothsayer. His memory was tarnished. The memory of Balaam in the people's mind was tarnished. That's it. He was killed for his own attempts to curse Israel and then just written off as an insignificancy later on in their history. Be careful with the gifts. You know what I mean? So, just very quickly, I'll cover the spoils of war that they got, because there is some massively important things in here, so I've got to cover them. It's got to be done. So we look at all of the stuff that was gathered. We're not going to go through all of the particular amounts and things like that. There's probably deeper studies that you can do with that. But firstly, we see that everything was commanded to be cleansed, whether it was the clothes being washed to remove that impurity of death, everything that could pass through fire to be cleansed, all the metals that had to be passed through the fire, and then all the things that wouldn't survive being passed through fire had to thus be cleansed with water. We see two purification rites here being brought together, water and fire, because this stuff was going to be brought before God. Now, interestingly, there's a parallel with this with something that happens in Joshua, but we'll just go through this first before I link it to that. This stuff was brought right before Moses, before it was divvied up into the allotments that was going to be given to all the people. Everything was put before Moses first. Everything was presented to God before then. He took his portion out and the rest was given to people. Everything had to be cleaned first, because it was coming into his presence. It could not be impure. It couldn't be dirty with the impurities of death. That in itself is quite a clear message, but it's not that I want to focus on. Now, this is a topic can often make people feel uncomfortable, and I apologise if it does, but it is something that needs to be raised, and that's the subject of tithing. We see here that everything was brought to God for it to be tithed first before it was then given to the people. Now, we've covered the tithe laws earlier on when we were looking at when they were given in Exodus, but here is a restatement of it. The fighters could very well have. We could look at it. The fighters could have taken their bit and then what was left given to God. No. They understood how important it was to put it all before Moses first. I'd like you to turn to Malachi 3, Malachi chapter 3, 7 to 11, please, brother.
From the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my laws and did not guard them. Turn back to me, and I shall turn back to you, says Yahweh of hosts. But you said, in what shall we turn back? Would a man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you said, in what have we robbed you? In the tithe and the offering. You have cursed me with a curse, for you are robbing me, this nation, all of it. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, and let there be food in my house. And please prove me in this, said Yahweh of hosts, whether I do not open for you the windows of the heavens, and shall pour out for you boundless blessing.
So what we see here is some quite stark statements. Now, we don't have a Levitical priesthood. We don't have the temple with which to provide, but we're still commanded to tithe. And we see here how God sees this. That to not give the tithe, to willingly not give the tithe, obviously there's things that you may be dealing with, which means that you can't necessarily give exactly the 10%, fair enough. But to not give a tithe willingly, to willingly withhold that, is to steal from God himself. Remember the purpose of the tithe? That was so the priest could actually eat. That was so the priest could actually do their job. They weren't allowed to take other work. They weren't allowed that because their service was to God himself. That's what kept the temple operating. That's what kept the Levites fed and clothed. But God treats that so seriously as to say that you are stealing from him by keeping that back. Now just consider this. Joe may not take the tithe to feed himself, Bex or Angie, but it's a fellowship. That money is going for the operation of the fellowship. That money is going to keep us fed, to keep us watered in the word. And the Spirit really pressed me this week. It was interesting that I coming across this when I read through the portion, because earlier on in the week I was actually really pressed to talk about tithing. Not to convict anyone, but just to restate, because I know it's a topic that is often danced around because money can be quite a contentious subject. But what we've got to look at this now is our fellowship is expanding, and exponentially as well. This is not just a trickle of people. We are getting people magnetizing to us. Absolutely. We've got to think about what work we're going to be doing to expand that further. What equipment will we need? What food will we need? What do we need to bring? How do we need to maintain this? How can we keep Joe blessing us with that message without putting that financial strain on him and his family? So, we are not talking about you having to give that 10%. We're not talking about that. Because you look at in the Gospels, when there's a guy rocks up to Yeshua saying, hey, look how much I'm giving. And then Yeshua just goes, yeah, what does that mean? Because why are you doing it? You're doing it to show off. Look at that lady there. She's just putting her last few coins in there, but her offering means more than yours does. It is not about the amount you give, but why you give it. It is a commandment in Torah for a reason. Okay, it's not to literally feed the priests these days, but we as a fellowship need to be fed. Now, not necessarily literally with food. That is a blessing, and yes, that does certainly come into it. But we need to have the facilities and the resources to be watered by the word, to be fed with the bread of life. Mm. And I think it's important that we remember that we are not giving to Joe, we are not giving to Bex or Angie, we are giving to God for his work. And we see the importance of it. And there's something here, there's an image here that I'll leave you with, that really should make us think about what we are bringing before God. It says there that it was gold. All of the gifts that were brought before Moses were the gold, jewellery, the ornaments, all of these beautiful things. What do we associate gold with? Purity. We associate gold with wealth. I mean, don't forget, the Bible never references platinum, but gold is always used in the Bible to be the most precious of metals. It signifies the best. What are we bringing before God? Are we bringing our gold? because even our silver isn't good enough.
There you go.
If we put something before God, it has to be the best. It has to be gold.
Amen.
Because only the best is good enough. Remember, God gives us everything.
Yeah.
You know, we must love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our strength. We could simply replace the word all with the best of.
Yeah.
The best of our soul. We owe him everything.
Amen.
All he asks for is 10% back. That's it. Because look what happens when Israel is blessed. They go to war and they destroy the Midianites. Do you know how many men were lost of Israel?
No.
Not
What?
one.
No.
Not
12,000.
one.
What's it about?
12,000 went into battle and 12,000 came back. But actually, there's something really important to be taken about the children of Israel putting the spoils of war before God first. In Joshua, we read of a story of one of the campaigns of a man who's like, I'm not sure I can really. My family. I'm going to keep some for myself. I'm going to bury it in my tent.
Yeah.
Can any of you who remember what happens to him?
It died.
He died. Yeah.
He died. He died.
But also, the Israelites lose the next battle because of that was kept.
That one man isn't the only one who suffers for that.
It's household.
The household does, and then the nation of Israel lose their next battle. If we are withholding from God, whatever that is, don't just think about the impact on yourself. Don't just be convicted about what could happen to you as a consequence. Be convicted as to what could happen to your household. And don't just be convicted about what could happen to your household, be convicted about what could happen to the nation. Remember that one man's iniquity, that one man keeping back, stealing from God, affected his household and the nation. Remember that. But with that, we're going to wrap up there so we can take a break. It's been really heavy today, so thank you very much for your patience.
Beautiful.
But here we are going to share in the fruits.
No, sure. I spent like a day this week praying for Joe. You know that how much he gives of himself to feed us the bread of life. And I was praying now that you'll put blessings upon him because I can see that he's a giver of himself. And we need to honour God to bless them as a family.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Definitely.
See, that's the
It's
way
not
we've got to
about
look at it.
saying I haven't given a tithe. It's saying, you know, I'm blessing Joe because you've called him.
Yeah.
And you know, he's given of everything of his prayer and the food, and we need to bless Yahweh so that through what we give, he can bless Joe and his family.
Absolutely. In chapter 32, we see that Reuben, Gad, and later on it turns out that the half of the tribe of Manasseh too, they want the land that's actually on the other side of the Jordan. The children of Israel have not yet crossed the river Jordan to enter the land of Canaan. It begins with, and the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had much livestock, a large number. And they saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilead, and saw that the place was a place for livestock. So they got all of their livestock, all of their herds and stuff like that. And they were looking at the land and they went, well, actually, this is going to be good for us. This is actually going to be good land for us. So they come before Moses to ask if they, rather than having an inheritance in the land of Canaan, could have that part of that piece of land as their inheritance. But in verses 6 to 15, Moses is not having this. Moses is like, what are you doing? This is no. What you come before me now to discourage the children of Israel from going into things? You ask him. He really goes to town on them because he thinks that they're coming in disobedience. Now Moses had dealt with people coming to him before and saying, yeah, we're not entering the land. So you can understand where he's coming from, because one of the interesting things to note is that Yahovah himself doesn't weigh in on this matter. It's Moses that initially starts complaining about this request of theirs. But you can understand where he's coming from, can't you? The last time you said, right, it's time to go into the land, the children of Israel just said, no, we're not doing that. They'd kill us all. We're not. No, we can't operate in. Well, we can't do that. We won't win. So you can understand where he's getting a little bit hesitant, but it is interesting to note that it does not come from God. This complaint of his does not come from God, because he sets down some conditions for them. He says, look, okay, fair enough, yeah, we'll let you have this, provided that all of those who would have fought in the land to clear it of its inhabitants, the ones who were, let's say, squatting on God's land, because they weren't the rightful owners of that place. God owns that land, they were squatting. And they were defiling it with all of their idolatrous behaviour and the worshipping of false gods and the sacrifices that were abominations. So it's God's land. But they have their task to earn, again, this goes back to the vows that we were talking about before. Their task to earn that place that they had requested was to send their men to fight in Canaan regardless. Now, what I think it sent Moses a little bit, made him a little bit uncomfortable about it, is because they said, we want to settle our children, our families first. So that to him may come across as, yeah, we're going to settle down and we're not going to go forward. Yeah. But they make a promise to him. They actually make that as a vow to him. And they do, they fulfill it. This is one of the things we see. This is almost like a contrast. This is a comparison in contrast to the rebellion of Korah. Korah came before him with a spirit of rebellion to say, no, we're not having what you say. These guys come to make a request with humility. Now, what I drew from this particular chapter is that God expects us to have some understanding of what we need, what our lives need. He will give us everything that we need, but he does want us to take some responsibility in defining that, in having diligence as to what we need. It opens up the chapter with, they had a lot of livestock, and then leads straight into them saying, oh, and they saw it was good for livestock. Elohim's almost like he's allowing them to have a think about what is required from their families, their tribes, and saying, okay, well, actually, doing our due diligence, this is what will be better for us. So then, being given the opportunity to make a vow to receive that, God rewards them with that. He gives them that. If it was wrong for them to request, then Elohim would have denied it straight off. He would have backed up Moses in his complaints, rather than actually giving Moses the vows with which they can swear to earn that inheritance. And they did. We see that they actually do send their men to fight in the war in Canaan, thus earning their place. Now, the very fact that their inheritance was outside of the land of Canaan, that's not to say that wouldn't cause issues later on in the history of Israel. Did you have something for this? Did you find where?
Yeah, in Joshua 22, it says that those tribes that stay on the other side of the river, they edified an altar there because they didn't want their children to forget that they were also part of Israel. But because the rest of Israel didn't understand why they were edifying an altar where God didn't command it, all of them came with weapons and ready to fight. And then Pinchas was the one who went and talked to them like, what is this that you're doing? If you see that the land is not right for you, come and have it in the land that God promised. And then these tribes go like, oh no, we're just doing this, or our kids won't forget Yahovah, and they will know that we are still part of Israel. So that almost caused a civil war within the tribes of Israel, and they have to apologize with them. And then Joshua says, okay, But if you're staying here, you need to respect and follow every command that Moses gave to us. And then he delivers a message to the rest of Israel that was already there, ready to fight, and say, look, everyone here should choose. And that's the chapter after is when Joshua says that amazing quote that said, you choose who are you going to follow, if the gods of your fathers or the God of Israel. But as for me and my house, we'll follow the Lord.
See there's a few things that we can actually take from this little story. Firstly, God gives us the gifts that we need. He made those people shepherds. He made those people herdsmen. He made them so that they were the ones that were looking after that vast amount of livestock. Therefore, he gifted them with the prudence that is needed to understand what is required for that work. So, knowing that, if we come before God for something that is part of our gift, that we require to be able to fulfill that, and we make a vow to him, he will honour that. He doesn't expect us to have to just follow everyone else. He does give us the intelligence with which we can actually make decisions that are relevant to our gifts. But we have to come before him with humility. Korah, he thought he knew better. That was the difference. He came before Moses with a rebellious spirit because he thought he knew better. These guys here, Reuben and Gad, they are perceiving what is best for their tribe, given what they have to do, given the gifts that they have. But they come before him with humility to ask, saying, look, if it's not right. Because, sorry, I'll tell you what, go on, you say your thing first.
Well, something that I drove from this, in the verse, 32:19, they say, we'll go and fight and we'll come back because we're not going to take the inheritance from that side of the Jordan because we have taken it here. So sometimes, as humans, what I took from here is that we are allowed to settle for less sometimes. If God has the best for you, but you say, I want the good one. Okay. There's an old quote that says the good is enemy of the best, because we see things are good, we settle for that, but we sometimes God has the best, not only good things, but the best. And it's not a sin, obviously. They were allowed to settle for that. If you want that, that's okay. Just keep the commandments. Sometimes we say, okay, this job is good for me. It allows me to keep the Sabbath or something, and I want to settle for that. Maybe God have a best option for you, but it's like, if you want that, fair enough, have it. It's okay with that. And but I believe that if we trust in God, because they haven't seen properly the land that God had for them. Wow. They just said, this one's good, we'll have that. Sometimes for rushing things, we miss the best that God has for us. And it's not wrong. It's just, you can live a good life or plenty.
A life of plenty.
A life of plenty that God thought and planned for you.
Amen.
So it's just waiting for his option and trusting that even if we said that is going to be my best options, trust, because if you wait for him and his guidance, I'm sure he will have like the best, not only a good one, but the best.
Absolutely. So although that's the other side of this, because we can look at this is they look at this in the sense of like, okay, they have done their due diligence, they know what their herds require, and God allows them that. But it is also that point that we have to trust that if we just go that little bit further. But there's a couple of other things we can draw from this. Now, firstly, Moses, before they've even actually put their full petition to him, he starts complaining to them that they're coming at him with rebellion. It's like, maybe we shouldn't be so quick to judge someone from what when they first start telling us. If it's something that we're not quite sure about, or we don't necessarily understand their intentions, keep on listening.
Yeah, can't close people down.
Exactly, because look what happens here. God does honour the decisions of Reuben and Gad. But Moses didn't even give it a chance at first. He had to be brought down from that, like, oh, where are you coming from? Oh, you know, he was, you could understand, he must have been so frustrated at all the things he'd had to deal with at this point. But we can learn from this. We shouldn't just jump in and presume that we understand why someone's saying what they are to us or why they're coming before us with the request. At the end of the day, it's not for us to make the decision on that. It's for God. So we've got to listen to people. Now, they may be wrong coming to us and saying what they're saying, but if we don't actually listen to them and hear them out, then we won't know. So I think that's an important lesson for us from Moses there. Go on, sir.
Sorry, just if you rearrange the words listen, if you rearrange the letters, you get silence. You can get silence out of the word.
There you go. That's brilliant. Again, the clues are right there. You have to listen. Now the thing is, that doesn't mean to say that it doesn't warrant a response. Of course it may do, but we've got to wait until they've finished talking to us, making that request, before we can make a reasonable judgment on it. We've been given prudence, diligence and gifts with which we can judge through Elohim's word, through the lens of Yeshua. But to be able to make those judgments, we need to listen first. Don't forget, Yeshua went to those who came to him.
Yeah.
It was those who were listening to him. You know, so we've got to keep this in mind. But, that said, even though they could have had better, they were still rewarded for their integrity and their consistency of committing and upholding the vow that they made by being given what they had requested. So again, we can look at this in so many different ways. It's a wonderful, wonderful picture to us. But we also have to be careful, knowing where it went later on in the history of Israel. We've got to be careful, just in case. Because don't forget, we're not just witnessing to the world. We're witnessing to the community. We're witnessing to our own people here. You know, we are always running the risk of making a bad witness, even for the people in this room. You know what I mean? We've got to make sure that our witness is consistently Yah's will.
Amen.
That it is always of God that we are doing the things, you know, always for God that we are doing the things. Because we are witnessing to everybody. Not just those in the world who don't know, but also those who do. You know, don't forget we're called to reprove our brothers and sisters of the sins that may send them to judgment. But we ourselves have to consider that to be able to do that, we have to live as a good witness.
Amen.
So, although Reuben and Gad were fine and God honoured them, think about the strife that caused. They weren't wrong, and this is the thing, this is what I want to sort of highlight from what B was saying. They weren't wrong. But even though they weren't wrong, they caused a number of the children of Israel that had gone into the land to stumble. Even if what we're doing isn't wrong, please pay attention to how it comes across, even to our brothers and sisters. Because everyone thinks in a different way. Everyone's been given a unique mind by God for that unique purpose that they serve. But that means we cannot assume we know how people think about our actions. What may seem right to us may be completely wrong to someone else. And okay, it may not be wrong for you to do it, but please consider how it comes across.
Sorry to keep interrupting. That reminds me of when it says, like, you know, without love you're just a big banging drum. Like, you're not nice to listen to because without love. So you can even bring scriptures.
Yeah.
But if it's just bashed down the person's head, you know, then it's no benefit.
Absolutely, and that's what we've got to consider. We know that there is a wonderful respect between everyone in this room. We know. This is not just fellowship or friendship, this is family. We all acknowledge this. We are part of that. We are part of Israel. We are the nation of God. We are grafted into this family. And what a wonderful thing that is. But that doesn't mean to say that we're free of conflicts. After all, I know how I got on with my sister for a number of years. Conflicts happen between siblings. It's just how we resolve them, how we deal with them, how we witness to each other. That is massively important in making sure that we're edifying each other, not causing each other to stumble. So that was so that wraps up Mattot. Now I will blast through Massei because there's some incredible pictures but I know it's going to get to that point, otherwise we'll all start falling asleep. So I only want to read one chapter from Massei, and all the other stuff I will cover in brief terms and give you the references. And please be rest assured that I will put all of the stuff that we covered into the full study that will be released at the end of next week. So there will be an opportunity to go back and have a look at all the scriptures for yourself. All the times where I've just given you a list of things to read, it will be in there. So for now, for the sake of time, what we'll do is we'll just read chapter 35, and then I'll cover and then we'll cover the lessons from there. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
Fantastic. So, would anybody who doesn't normally like to read want to read chapter 35?
Jehovah spoke to Moshe in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, saying, "Command the children of Israel to give to the Levites from the inheritance of their possessions cities in which to live. They are also to give to the Levites pasture lands around the cities. Thus they will have cities to live in and pastures for their cattle, flocks, and all their livestock. The pastures you give the Levites will extend out from the walls around the cities for 1,000 cubits. You are to measure outside the cities 2,000 cubits on the east side, 2,000 cubits on the south side, on the west side 2,000 cubits, and on the north side 2,000 cubits. These are to be pasture lands for the cities. 6 of the cities you give the Levites are to be cities of refuge, to which anyone who kills anyone may flee. Besides these, you are to give the Levites 42 more cities. In all, you are to give the Levites 48 cities with their pastures. The cities that you are to give to the Levites from the possession of the children of Israel should be proportionate to the inheritance of each tribe. Give many from the one who has many, and few from the one who has few." Yah spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you are to select cities which will be cities of refuge to which one might flee if he has killed someone by accident. They are to be cities of refuge from the avenger, so the manslayer may not die before standing trial before the assembly. The 6 cities you designate are to be your cities of refuge. Designate 3 cities on this side of the Jordan and 3 in the land of Canaan as cities of refuge. These 6 cities of refuge are to be for the children of Israel, as well as for the outsider and the visitor in their midst, for anyone killing a person by accident. Now if the manslayer strikes someone with an iron object so that he dies, he is a murderer, and the murderer must die. If anyone has a stone in his hand that could be deadly, and strikes anyone with it so that he dies, he is a murderer, and the murderer must die. Or if someone has a wooden object that could kill, and strikes anyone so that he dies, he is a murderer, and the murderer must be put to death. The blood avenger himself may put the murderer to death. When he finds him, he is to kill him. If anyone pushes someone maliciously, or throws anything at him with deadly intent, or with hostility hits him with his fist so that he dies, the one hitting him is a murderer. The blood avenger may put the murderer to death when he finds him. But if he pushes him suddenly, or throws an object at him with no intent, or without seeing him should drop a stone on him resulting in his death, but he was not his enemy and intended him no harm, the assembly must judge between the manslayer and the avenger of blood according to these regulations. The assembly must protect the manslayer from the avenger of blood. The assembly should send him back to the city of refuge to which he had fled, and he is to remain there until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. But if the manslayer should go outside the city limit of a city of refuge to which he had fled, and should the blood avenger find him outside the city limits of the refuge city, the blood avenger may put him to death without being guilty of his blood. The manslayer must stay within the limits of his city of refuge until the high priest dies, and after the death of the high priest, the manslayer may return to his property. These are to be the statutes of justice for your generations in all your dwelling places. Everyone killing anyone shall be put to death as a murderer only on the testimony of more than one witness. No one is to be put to death on the testimony of only one witness. You are not to accept ransom for the life of a murderer. He deserves to die, and he is to die. Do not receive a ransom for one who has fled to his city of refuge, allowing him to return to his land before the high priest's death. You are not to pollute the land in which you are. Blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for land polluted by bloodshed, except by the blood of the one who sheds it. You are not to defile the land where you live, where I dwell, for I dwell among the children of Israel.
Salah, thank you, brother. So, I was going to cover a couple of things briefly from the other chapters, and then we'll get into that one. Now, I know Joe covered the refuge cities brilliantly last time we looked at this earlier on in the Torah. So I'm only going to cover that briefly, but it is a beautiful picture, and it's one that's worth being reminded of. But so we skipped over 33 because it is a list of where the children of Israel camped, the stations that they camped on in their sojourning in the wilderness. Now, the same with some of the chapters we skipped in the previous portion where it's a list of names and things. There is always something interesting to be found and things like that. But that would have been too in-depth for something like this. But I highly recommend you go ahead and have a look at these chapters yourselves. If you have a look at the way the Hebrews name things, they don't just give names according to whims. They give names according to states of being and attributes that are used. They're named for a purpose. So guaranteed there will be something to find in there that's amazing. But there is something just at the very end of that chapter that I'd like to draw your attention to. And it is 56. Now, 50 to 56, it's like a restating of the command to go and wipe out the inhabitants of Canaan. As we mentioned earlier on, those people were defiling God's land. This is God's land, not Israel's land, God's land. And these squatters were making it filthy. And I don't just mean physically, I mean spiritually. So they were commanded once again to go and destroy all that was ungodly in the land. Fine. But here, down in verse 56, 55 and 56. And if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall be that those whom you let remain shall be pricks in your eyes and thorns in your side, and they shall trouble you in the land where you dwell. Now this is the clincher here. And it shall be that I do to you as I thought to do to them. Wow, okay, fair enough. That's serious. Because the thing is, when God commands something, you do it. You know, God commanding us to do something will bring a blessing. It is a blessing to be commanded by God to do something because you're doing His work. And you will be rewarded for that. But if you do it in your own esteem, or you do it in a way that is only for your benefits and purposes, then you have just cursed yourself. You have removed that blessing. It's like the children of Israel. They could take themselves out of the protection. They couldn't be cursed from someone from the outside, but they can take themselves from outside of the blessing of the protection of God. And this is why this warning is in here, because they need to do exactly as God had told them. If they didn't, they were at risk of curses. But why? How? Well, let's have a look at 1 Corinthians 5, verse 6, and then 9 and 10.
Okay. Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the entire lump? I wrote to you in my letter not to keep company with those who whore, and I certainly did not mean with those of the world who whore, or with the greedy of gain, or swindlers, or idolaters, since you would need to go out of the world. But now I have written to you not to keep company with anyone called a brother if he is one who whores, or greedy of gain, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or a swindler, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Do you not judge those who are inside? But Elohim judges those who are outside, and put away the wicked one from among you.
A stark warning there. This is why they had to destroy all of the inhabitants of the land, and we see that they later on they don't. And this is why the book of Judges has so many stories where they're given their salvation and then they once again fall into idolatry. They're given the salvation, they once again fall into idolatry. This is why. And what this shows is the verses in 1 Corinthians. It shows us that the reason why they need to remove all of the inhabitants is because that little leaven leavens the lump. That little bit that's left will cause strife for the entire community. Because then what happens? The people of Israel themselves start to whore around after other gods. And then, as Paul continues to say, you're not even supposed to be around those people because they're going to cause you to stumble. So leaving the inhabitants of the land would cause those who are weaker amongst the children of Israel to stumble. And those people stumbling would cause the rest of the congregations to stumble. This was a stark, stark warning. Those evil squatters needed to be gone for the safety of Israel.
I just want to say, to keeping company with them and to witnessing to them is two different things, I would say.
Absolutely.
So we still can witness to these people, but it's your discernment to know when the line is drawn with that.
Absolutely, that's a really good distinction to make, because the thing is, how are we supposed to bring them out of transgression and sin if we don't at least give them the opportunity to see the blessings that come from walking righteously? Absolutely, brother, that's a very important distinction to make. However, calling them brothers and sisters while they're walking in idolatry is what can cause us to stumble.
Sorry, I've read about this same verse the other day in analyzation, and it is explaining like this is really to the communities like us. It's talking to Christians. God doesn't judge these ungodly, but does, but differently, because they are ungodly. But we are more judged who know right and we don't do it. And that this verse is really talking about our brothers who are called Christians, and if they sin, we shouldn't let them stay among us, because they chose not to do what's right and they know what's right.
Exactly, that's the dangerous friendship. When they say they're Christians, when they say they follow Torah, they do something completely different. So the Torah is not for going outside and say you're a sinner, you're a sinner, you're a sinner, because they don't even know what sin is.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, sin has no real meaning in their lives. So what it's warning us is to not spend time with people who do things that aren't right when they are in Torah, because when you see, oh, Mark is doing it, so that means it's not that wrong.
Yeah.
And you start making concessions with sin because you're seeing that on other people who call themselves Torah followers, and that's a dangerous thing. Not with people outside, because we know they're from Babylon. We expect those things for them, for people outside, but in people that are our brothers and sisters, it's like, oh, hang on, then I must have been judging that wrong. Is it right then? And start doing it when it could be so dangerous to you.
That goes back to what we were talking about before when we were talking about Reuben and Gad. It's like we've really got to be careful how we are witnessing, and this is again an explanation of some of the dangers of this. But moving on, interestingly, we see that the land is to be apportioned by lots. Now, originally I was going to get Jack to give us a breakdown in this, but it might be a little bit too much given what we've got to cover. But what we see here is that rather than the children of Israel going into the land and then deciding for themselves what they deserve and what they don't, the land had to be apportioned by lot, which was basically putting it into the hands of God. Now, as far as the people who are casting lots concerned, they don't know the outcome. You know, I mean, we use words like chance. You've got to be really careful with things like that because they come from, let's say, non-biblical concepts. But like, we don't know what's going to happen, but God does. He knows the outcome of that lot, so he knows what's going to be apportioned. Because the danger is, think about it, it wasn't just Israel, it was the Israel and the mixed multitude. How easy would it have been for the children of Israel to go, well, we're actually children of Jacob. You're not, you came with us from Egypt, so you can have that ghetto over there. You know what I mean? There was always that risk. I mean, we don't want to assume this of people, but we can't assume that they wouldn't either, which is probably why God put it in this context to say, right, this is how you apportion things by lot. They were given areas that were proportionate to the size of their tribes, but within that, how they apportioned that land was by lot. It wasn't that anyone could choose the nicest thing for themselves. What they got was what God had given them, and that is really massively important. Really be thankful for what you have, because it's not through your own strength that you have that. It's through God gifting it to you. So again, they put their trust that God was going to give them the bit of land that they needed. In fact, I'll jump ahead a little bit to something from chapter 36, which is not one we're going to cover in depth again, but this actually links to this. Now in chapter 36 of this portion, the very last chapter of Numbers, it references us back to chapter 27, where the daughters of Zelophehad come because they haven't got brothers to claim the inheritance. There's fathers and his brothers had all died in the wilderness, but they need to claim an inheritance from that. So they came to the priest, they came to Moses to basically make sure that they got an inheritance, and that was fine, it was all resolved. But what we see in chapter 36, linking to this idea of inheritance and the idea of the land being given by lot, it required then a law to be put in place that what was given to them in the casting of the lots was what would remain with the tribes. Because of this idea that the daughters could then marry, they were thus commanded to marry within the tribe of their father. Wow. Because otherwise, what would have happened come the Jubilee is one tribe would have been weighted in favour of another. That's why they couldn't pass inheritance between tribes, because what it meant is what they started with is not necessarily what they ended with. This is how monopolies are developed. This is why we have the Jubilee. So that the people couldn't actually start hoarding more land through strategic marriages.
And to the Jubilee, for those that don't know, that's when all debts was released.
That's it. Yeah. You're in the year of the Jubilee, wherever you'd moved to, whatever house you'd bought elsewhere, didn't matter. You had to go back to the land that was given to your ancestors in the promised land. You had to go back there. You couldn't own land that wasn't part of your inheritance for any more than 50 years. And that's a really significant thing. And this law is almost like the backing that up so that they couldn't use loopholes of marriage inheritance to expand it. So each tribe should have ended up with what they've started at. It's that maintenance of consistency. Beautiful thing. So I just wanted to highlight that to you. Is there anything else that you want to share with that one, or should we move on? Okay. So, first, chapter 34 also covers the names of the tribe leaders. Again, it's what I've said with the stations of where they've stopped. It is really interesting to study, but we haven't really got the time to cover it today. So, 35. We read this one because this has the most significant pictures in it. After we've covered 35, that's us done for the day. But there's a few things I really need to bring your attention to in here. Now, this, not to hark on about something, but the first 8 verses of this chapter take us right back to something we covered in Mattot. This chapter starts with the making sure that the Levites were given a fair inheritance. Don't forget, they weren't allowed to claim tribal land for themselves as all the other 11 tribes were. They were dispersed throughout those 11 tribes to be the ones who did God's work within them. So God made sure that they would get treated fairly by the tribes which they've been dispersed into. it was a commandment that they were given cities. Because again, how easy would it have been to say, oh, I've got this land and that's going to that family and that family and that family. Oh, we didn't think of the Levites. Oh, well, fair enough. They can just stay with someone else. No, because they were doing God's work, they had to have the provisions necessary to do God's work. When we look at the distinction of the cities, they had to have land outside of their cities that had enough land for pasture, for the livestock that were going to be used in the sacrificial rituals. They had to make sure that they had enough space to keep, think about it, like without the space, if you were couch surfing, you wouldn't necessarily be able to remain as hygienic, you wouldn't be able to keep your clothes as well kept until you had a place to store your own things, a place to lay your head that was yours. It's all about them being able to do God's work. Don't forget, their clothes, their garments were set apart. Everything about the Levites was set apart to God, and therefore so too were the places that they had to dwell.
Wow.
They had to dwell within the land apportioned to one of the 11 tribes, but they had to have their own space. They had to have their own place that they could return to cleanse themselves. It was massively important, but again, this takes us right back to tithing, because they were commanded then, the children of Israel were commanded to make sure that their priests were well accounted for. At the end of the day, they were the representatives, of God in those communities.
I have a verse for that in Galatians 6:6. Could you go, because it's in Spanish?
And let him who is instructed in the word share in all that is good with him who is instructing.
And also 2 Corinthians 9.
2 Corinthians 9.
So with offerings and stuff, we see through all the scripture that God gave us first, and then we give back from what He has given us. So it's not really us.
Yeah.
We don't own that. It's His, and we just take back what He has given us. But it says that He blesses in this verse. Well, I'll let you read it first.
2 Corinthians 9.
10 and 11.
And he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food shall supply and increase the seed you have sown and increase the fruit of your righteousness, being enriched in every way for all simplicity, which works out thanksgiving to Elohim through us.
12:2.
Because the rendering of this service not only supplies the needs of the set apart ones, but also is overflowing through many thanksgivings to Elohim.
So He gave us to bless others, and He is the one who give you the seed to sow. It's not like you have to take it out of nowhere. He is the one who provides you to provide to others. He is the one that blesses you to bless others. So when He said, I'm blessing you to bless my house, how can we say, oh no, I need it? We stop that blessing. But the wonderful thing about giving to God is that He never keeps it from Himself. He always gives us back in abundance. And something wonderful that we see in Malachi is that it says, prove me on this. This is the only thing where you're allowed to prove God. And He said, and see that I will open the gates of the heaven and I will bless you, and I will rebuke the devourer from your land. And we see that in our life. Sometimes the wage doesn't last, and if it's not, we need to fix that, we need to fix this. I think that's the devourer. He, like little holes in your life that are just like grabbing part of your wage to those things that you didn't supposed to spend on. But when you bless your wage by giving the tithe, everything else is protected. He can stop that and bless you. Like, could you read the verse 11 and 12?
And I shall rebuke the devourer for you, so that it does not destroy the fruit of your ground, nor does the vine fail to bear fruit for you in the field, says Yahovah of hosts. And all nations shall call you blessed, for you shall be a land of delight, says Yahovah of hosts. What we see here is that you don't necessarily get more or less money, whether you tithe or not. What happens is you lose more of that money if you haven't already had it blessed. So your money, you will find, goes further if you give it back, if you give what God asks back to Him. I will put my hand up now and say that we have found this very thing. We used to say, in fact, someone said this to me a long time ago, and I didn't really consider much of it until very recently, where we learned this lesson for ourselves. And they said, at first I said, how can I afford to tithe? Now I say, how can I afford not to?
Praise God.
So it's a really important message, but just to highlight the fact that it once again restates what the commandments to give to the Levites. The Levites had to be treated fairly because they were doing God's work. Everything had to be put in place so that they could do that.
Can you do it with food, or do you have to do it like with money as well?
Think about it in terms of, I don't want to answer that question directly by saying yes or no. But what I will say is you're bringing it in service to God. Don't forget, originally tithes wouldn't have just been money. They would have been 10% of the land, 10% of your livestock, 10% of maybe the money that you've earned doing this and that. So it's whatever you can bring to the fellowship.
Yeah.
And I would actually say that this does involve physical resources, not just in terms of energy. Time and energy, fantastic. Yes, absolutely tithe that as well. But I think it is significant that we put the physical side of the tithe there as well, because that's how the fellowship and God's work through the fellowship is sustained.
Can I just say, from a personal point of view, you've had experience of this, and just to share, you can actually have a greedy mentality when you're poor.
Yeah, that's true.
So you could be greedy as in, I'm going to keep this is
Yeah.
mine,
Yeah.
I need this,
I
I
need
need
it.
that,
Yeah,
I
I've seen
need
that.
this, I need that. And because you're poor, because you think, I haven't got enough for
Justify
this, I've got enough for that.
Stingy.
And that's actually greed.
Stingy.
It's inadvertently greed. So you're basically stingy, you're not giving back to God. And I had that mentality for a while, and God cursed my life basically, because
Yeah.
God could not release the blessing,
That's true.
which He will do. He will honour your giving. And I missed out on being blessed. But I obviously recognised that. Someone spoke to me about it, and I identified it, and obviously repented. And then since then, I've been doing my best to
Boss.
Praise God.
be a cheerful giver in whatever
Right,
capacity.
Michelle.
Amen.
And it's a true blessing to bless others, isn't it? It really is.
It really is.
Something happened to me the other day. I was going to say at the beginning, but I didn't really think of it until just now. But everybody's walking in town. There's some fella, he was just homeless, and he asked to change in that, and I literally only has £1 on me. But I thought, I'll go and get him a drink, so I'll give him £1. And I thought, I'll go get him a bottle of water from the shop anyway. And we went in to the self-checkout, and when I went to the till, there was £9 just in the change thing on the till, like. And I thought, well, I'm going to take that. And then I was thinking, should I give him all it? And the way I got convicted to give him the £4, so the pound I gave him before was £5, and then I got £5 as well. But with the water, it just goes to show, like, what you give out, you get back, like, I think.
Absolutely. More so even.
More so, yeah.
This is the
You've got
thing.
more, you've got
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, I've got one of them really small, like I was in the Asda and there was 2 avocados left, and this guy was walking around. Basically, the reason why I caught my attention because he asked someone, do you have avocados, to someone that didn't work there, and you know when someone doesn't work there, he goes, I don't work here. And then there was like this big joke then, because then I said to him, because he asked someone else, and then the guy who worked there went to show me the avocados were, but I just taken the last 2, and so I said, there's only 2 left, do you want one? And then basically that was it really, and then we were laughing because then I was like, you're just going to keep asking people, aren't you? And then we were all laughing, and then later on I was like looking in a different section of the vegetables, and there was like a random avocado just there.
Wow.
So we just got it back.
Probably is, though, probably did it before.
You sure that wasn't a messenger who you were speaking to?
Yeah.
But aside from what we can gain from giving to God, is it not a blessing to support this fellowship? To say, I'm
Yeah.
using my money to bless this,
Yeah.
because we're looking for our inheritance in heaven. Here, I'll give what I have, because well, anyway, it's a blessing to be used by God to bless someone else, and even more to bless, being used by God to bless him,
Yeah.
and to
Wow.
bless his house. It's absolutely amazing.
Absolutely. So it's a wonderful thing. So I understand it can be quite a contentious subject to some people. I understand that there's certain things that you might be going through that might mean that you can't necessarily bring the full 10%, but it's just consider it as you're just giving back to God what He's given to you.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, everything that we hold has come from His hands in the first place. So we are to bless. Go on, Steph.
Can I just say, I heard this quote years ago and it said that God doesn't put His blessings in pots, He puts them in pipes as they travel through, and He doesn't put them in reservoirs but rivers.
Yeah, that's
So
a
all
really good way.
Wow.
That's
It
beautiful.
flows through.
Yeah.
Just to flow through to the
Absolutely. So it's a case of, think of that. You're supporting God's work, you're supporting the fellowship, and you're supporting the wonderful work that Joe, Angie and Bex do when they open up their house for us. So that's just that. I just wanted to go over that one again because there's a couple of things I missed from last time round, but it was there in the fact that they were commanded to make cities for the Levites. Just a quick interesting little thing about the way it describes the arrangement of the Levite city. Now, there's some confusion over to why it says 1,000 cubits in one and 2,000 in the very next verse. I'm not going to go into that. I haven't fully studied that one myself. But if we just take the picture, imagine looking at the city from a bird's eye view. We have the city in the middle, and then we have a pasture ground. So the place where the priests live, and then all of this land outside of it where the flocks and the herds roam. That for me reminds me of, well, Jerusalem for a start, God's house in the middle and His children, His flocks around the outside of it. And I think that's a wonderful picture, is to say that God is in the centre. God is in the centre of that city, and He is surrounded by His flocks. His flocks are cared for, they're given space in abundance, that they can wander around and they can be fed. And in that centre, in that heart of that land that is given, is God's essence, His spirit, the people that do His work. So I just thought that was a lovely little picture about the cities as well.
It actually says in Ezekiel 48, Ezekiel 48, in this verse 35, in this chapter, it's giving the prophecy of the land that it's going to be the new Jerusalem. And at the end, it states, verse 35, please.
All around 18,000 cubits, and the name of the city from that day is Yahovah is there.
Amen.
And it's describing that in the middle is going to be there.
That's amazing. Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, so that's it. We see that the cities of refuge that God puts there. Sorry, the cities of God all have Him in the centre of it, and we, the flocks, surround it. They're always there, always radiating out from the centre of where God's presence sits, which is wonderful. So cities of refuge. Now the idea would be is that if someone had accidentally killed someone, they were still subject to the law of the blood avenger, whereby the person who was the closest relative to the person who was killed would be able to seek that person's life, because the only thing that can pay for a life is a life. Any blood that is spilled must be paid for by blood. Now, the interesting thing is that I found is the word for blood avenger in Hebrew is goel. And it wasn't just the person who would seek revenge for their fallen brother. Actually, the goel seemed to be, from my studies, an actual designated role, because the goel wasn't just the person that would then go and seek the blood of the one who shed their family's blood. He was actually also the official protector of the land, so that none of the land could be taken through unlawful inheritance. So the goel was actually quite a significant role. It wasn't just someone who went off fighting for anyone that had hurt their family. It was actually as a protector. Oh. Now, we already know, because Joe's covered this beautifully in the past, that Yeshua will be our blood avenger when He returns. Revelation 6:10-11, it states that He is coming back to claim the blood of those who have shed His children's blood. That's a wonderful thing. But God Himself in Hebrew is referred to as a goel in several chapters of the prophets and the Psalms as well. You have Isaiah 41:14, Jeremiah 50:34, Psalms 19:14, Isaiah 35:4. He is Israel's Goel, not
Okay.
just the blood avenger, but the protector. It's not just a, oh, you've grieved my family, I'm going to do you in. He's looking after us in the first place. And should we be harmed by those seeking to do us ill, he will become the blood avenger for us. He is sending Yeshua down. Now that Yeshua is now supplicating for us in the tabernacle before the throne of God, he will come back as that blood avenger, as our Goel. What a beautiful picture that is. So I didn't want to go too deep into that, but I just wanted to reaffirm that, because the whole law of the blood avenger thing, it's just such a clear picture. He is a God of justice. He will not allow innocent blood to be shed. But there's an interesting verse. We're not far off now, but there's a really interesting thing that I didn't know first time I read this. But we look at 35 verse 32. Take no ransom for a life of a murderer who is guilty of death. Now, I was reading my study Bible when I was preparing for this, and there's an interesting little note here, and it refers to this verse. An important clause: unlike other codes written Hittite or unwritten Bedouin, Israelitic legislation did not tolerate monetary compensation for human life. Human life was not about monetary value. If someone had shed their blood, they couldn't just bribe the officials to let them get away with it. It was like for like, blood for blood. There was no price on human life. What an incredible thing that is. God has put laws in place that show you the true value of life. And that true value of life is life, not money. In other cultures, the murderers could get away with it by just simply paying off. Not in this one.
We see that in our culture too, don't we?
Absolutely no justice is really served when the system can be corrupted by those who just happen to have a little bit more money. But you know what? This law in place means that when he comes down, there will be no compensation beyond the life for life. It says in Revelations, all of the wicked kings and leaders of the earth will flee to the mountains.
That's right.
They'll flee to the mountains, saying, protect us from this, and the mountains will just right down on top of them. The mountains won't protect them at all. There is no protection from those who've committed atrocities towards those who are considered God's people. He is our Goel. He will always be our Goel. And when he returns, he will bring that justice with him. That's an incredible thing. So, like I said, there's been a lot of heavy stuff in this Parasha, but when we start looking into it and breaking it down, there's so much to see. Sorry, did you have something?
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry. Something that I love about the cities of refuge, we know from Joe's teaching that represents Yeshua, that he is our city of refuge, where we can go and find protection. But the difference between these cities of protection and Yeshua is that what the law couldn't do is, when you were guilty, you will need to pay, but Yeshua paid the price. So he will take you and he will protect you, even if you're guilty, but if you repent and call upon his name.
Joe, that's brilliant. I'm so glad that Vivi shared that, because I've actually got that written down in my notes, but I'm just so conscious of time that I missed one of the most important images from this study. He is our city of refuge, but not only is he our city of refuge, he is also the high priest that died so that we could be released from that debt that we owed. What an incredible thing. I have scriptural references here ready for you. Psalm 49, Psalm 90, but I will let you go and read those ones for yourself. As I said, I will put all of these things into the study for you to have a look at, so you can really just take your own time to digest it, because what a powerful image. What a powerful image. He is our city of refuge. He is our high priest. He is our blood avenger. He is our protector.
Wow. Just thinking of Psalm 23 as well, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, he makes me lie down in green pastures, when you say about the pastures.
Absolutely, there you go. And there's a reference to the Levitical cities as well.
Yeah.
God at the centre. Our lives should be as the Levitical cities. The works and the presence of God right there in the centre of it, and all of the pasture land around it, where we take that work to. Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you all for your patience. I know it was a bit of a long one this time round.